So for those of you who don't know, it is illegal to practice unnatural sexual acts in Lebanon, which is based on a penal code that we inherited under the French Mandate. So while we were a French colony, which was a nice gift back in the 40s that we still keep today and practice. So that means that this law is used to discriminate against or practice violence against the bodies of queer people in Beirut, and that is especially true for queer refugees, trans people, and sex workers as well. So that violence is rarely ever documented in Lebanon, and it is only today that the media is actually covering this. We rarely also get the representation in local news, even if it is positive stories or stories of success. It is only today that things are changing. So that is exactly what prompted me to start at this page, where I basically share short stories about daily struggles with microaggressions, right? So what happens, for example, when I go to the airport to pick up my partner and I can't kiss her? Or how do I deal with an overly curious hotel receptionist? Or what do I say to a gynecologist who asks me how lesbians have sex? True story. So if you are interested in knowing what happens, feel absolutely welcome to visit the page and give me some support. That would be really nice. But when I did start Beirut by Dyke, I also allowed my passion to for story to fully explode. And this is why also I decided to pursue a second master's degree in Leiden University in cultural analysis and literary theory. And this is why I'm here, and this is why I'm here today to talk to you about the process of migration. And so for one of my gender and diversity classes, I had to do a creative assignment in which I did talk about this experience. So I'm going to show you the video. First of all, are there any international students here? Okay. So I'm going to show you the video. Maybe it will speak better than I did about what I felt when I first came here.
You tore my skin with feather touch. It trickles in my sleep. A stream of afterbirth and blood, 1,000 stitches deep.
الدبس بطحيني وتذكر تذكرني لك يا أخي روح تنساني يا حبيبي كان بودي خليك قربي عارفك عقلي بتطوج لقلبي واطبخ أكلاتك واشطف لك بيتك دلع ولادك أعمل ست بيتك بس انت ببيتك وانا شبيك لك والله يا ريتك ما بعمرك بليت
overshare, so if you also visit the page, you'll witness that as well. So the thing is, when I came to Leiden, I experienced the usual challenges that any international student would experience while being uprooted. So things like having to translate so much in Albertine, or accepting the fact that you're going to pay rental and service fees that are colossal, and being okay with that. So these changes were okay with me, or having to explain Middle Eastern politics, like why Israel is different from Lebanon, and we don't really talk, for example. So these things were fine. Any international student would actually experience these. The difference for me when I compare myself to my Italian or Greek friends, for example, is that my relationship with my home country was already conflictual before I came here, right? And it took coming here for me to start calling Lebanon home. And this would be particularly true, I think, for most queer people who do experience whether blatant or subtle oppression in their own home country and their own families. So when I came to Leiden, the second thing that happened, I was an activist when I was home. When I came to Leiden, I don't know if you've heard, but the uprising started, right? The uprisings in October 2019. So the people started protesting against the corruption of the government that was still holding them under economic duress. And this is when the whole country started, going down to the streets. And I was here feeling at the same time that, now everyone's angry at everything. And now everyone decided to engage in this collective action. And I experienced a major case of FOMO, feeling like, okay, I would either want to completely connect with my country, being online all the time, to read the news, stay updated, etc., or having to completely disconnect in order to continue my normal life here, where the biggest problem I was experiencing was, having my garbage pass fall into the automatic garbage bin, and truly experiencing a first world problem. So I was constantly between this push and pull of having to connect or disconnect. So I know I was asked today to share my personal experience around migration, and as I was preparing this story, I kept realizing that my experience, the very fact that I am here, is a political reason and not really a personal one. So if you look at the numbers, in Lebanon we have 4.7 million people residing in the country. And how many outside? Does anyone know? Can you guess? 4.7 inside, 14 million outside, right? So which says a lot. I'm not the only one in the diaspora experiencing this. So migration for us is a political problem, not a personal one. Because if you realize that if my government had indeed been giving us basic economic, financial, infrastructure necessities, we wouldn't have to constantly consider migrating and experiencing this brain drain that is actually corroding the whole country, as well as other factors, of course. Right? So in a way, my experience of migration constantly also feels like an exile. One I chose and had the privilege to choose, but also one that I had to absolutely experience and didn't technically have a choice in that. And so you do experience this challenge, right? This disconnection, connection, Albertine problems, things like that, and that's fine. And at the same time, the funny thing is, that your family back home views your being in Europe as a success. You have made it. And it's something to be proud of, right? And eat baqlewa over, celebrate. It's very important. And at the same time, right, I am still here as a Lebanese expat, as a student, as a skilled worker. I've had many privileges that allowed me to be here, and that has absolutely nothing to do with the experience of being a refugee or an asylum seeker, right? So when I was in Beirut, I had the privilege again to be out. I was working in an American University of Beirut under the leadership of a dean who back then was leading the gender initiative at the Faculty of Arts and Sciences, working with the Title IX office, which works with sexual harassment. I was able to be out in Beirut, right? And it's not a question of, Middle East, or you can even debate what Middle East is as a region, as a word, right? But it intersects very much with questions of class, gender, and race, right? Of course. So in Beirut, I was able to be out, which allowed me to have the support of my family, which supports my being here. and support my sexuality, if indeed one can support asexuality, right? So that would be very different from a refugee experience, where queer refugees, for example, sometimes, like you said, right, they lose connections with their families, so they don't have the support of the diaspora, right? So we know, for example, that, as you've mentioned, right, all sorts of problems that they encounter that might be different from the problems that an expat might encounter. So, for example, assault, rape, being harassed, whether by staff members within the immigration process or whether by other refugees, right? And trans refugees are a more vulnerable population as well, because sometimes, right, so when they're taken into those immigration centers, they're allocated based on their gender at birth, right? Most of them also don't have access to the drugs in order to continue their transition, which is a whole other problem, right? And so maybe we can reflect together or think or take this question with us about these taxonomies, right, that we use language for and that have been very much institutionalized, about who counts as a refugee, who counts as a good or bad refugee, as an expat versus an asylum seeker versus a migrant versus a traveler. What are these differences and how do they affect the lived experiences of displacement? Thank you.